Blog Talk Radio.
Join BluPrint Radio each Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. BluPrint Radio host Gloria Thornwell interviews organization leaders on trends and best practices in business and human capital management, business and human resource leadership, and being a change champion in the new global business economy. www.blogtalkradio.com/BluPrint LLC.
Hi, and welcome to BluPrint Radio. BluPrint Radio is a division of the BluPrint Leadership Institute, and on the BluPrint Radio show, we interview organization leaders and change management professionals who are subject matter experts in human capital management, business strategy, government contracting, and those who have reinvented and led organization transformation in the new global and changing economy. I'm Gloria Thornwell, Human Resource and Management Consultant and your BluPrint Radio show host. You know, conflict is inevitable, and when it happens in the workplace, organization leaders have to be prepared to manage and resolve encounters that could lead to crises. The unfortunate truth, however, is that many times organization leaders are unprepared to intervene and identify resolution when there is a disagreement between subordinates. And far too often, the disagreement becomes unmanageable and ultimately leads to a place where the discrepancy could lead to violence in the workplace. Our discussion topic today is conflict resolution and crisis management. And on the line is our special guest, Dr. Jeffrey King, a trained psychotherapist and organizational development psychologist. Dr. King has used his in-depth expertise to facilitate workshops, seminars, and assessments to numerous organizations around the country. He is a former adjunct professor of psychology at the Northern Virginia Community College and was the primary researcher at the National Institute of Health on their study of post-traumatic stress disorder. Welcome, Dr. King, to BluPrint Radio. You know, conflict resolution and crisis management, Dr. King, is a scary topic. And in my experiences, sometimes conflict begins with workplace bullying. Other times, it's just as simple as two individuals who don't see through the same set of lenses. And other times, to be quite frank, some individuals just in the workplace just don't get along. So we're going to go to a break, but when we return, we're going to begin our discussion with a basic definition of workplace bullying, and then we're going to move into discussion about conflict and crisis management. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Join BluPrint Radio each Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. BluPrint Radio host Gloria Thornwell interviews organization leaders on trends and best practices in business and human capital management, business and human resource leadership, and being a change champion in the new global business economy. www.blogtalkradio.com/BluPrint LLC.
Hi, and welcome back to BluPrint Radio. I'm Gloria Thornwell, your BluPrint Radio show host. Our discussion topic today is conflict resolution and crisis management. Our special guest is Dr. Jeffrey King, a trained psychotherapist and organizational development psychologist. Dr. King, are you on the line, and can you hear me?
Yes, I'm on the line.
Absolutely. Excellent. Welcome to BluPrint Radio. And so we're just going to jump right in here. So, Dr. King, can you explain to our listeners, you know, the definition of workplace bullying?
I sure can. I'm glad we started there. It's a particular type of conflict, but workplace bullying is a repeated intentional behavior that's directed at an employee that is intended to degrade, humiliate, embarrass, and it's normally targeted at a person's performance. And it can come from any level. It can come from peers, supervisors, or the like.
So are there some early signs or signals, if you will, of workplace bullying? So in other words, what signals should a business leader or a supervisor or manager kind of pay attention to, or even colleagues? Like, what is a signal that shows that there could be some potential bullying in the workplace?
The one thing that differentiates bullying would be the enjoyment that the aggressor has. They tend to enjoy giving out that sort of thing. In other words, making the person the brunt of the joke. Just a couple of early signals or signs that you can look for: shouting in private or in front of colleagues, name calling, anything that's disrespectful comments or belittling. For supervisors, if they're nitpicking an employee, a particular person, or overloading them with work to sort of put them in a situation where they're not successful. And or keeping information away so they can't perform their job effectively. Those are some of the signals.
Yeah. So, those are some of the things that, I've actually seen and witnessed in the workplace, and it certainly can lead to instances of bullying, in particular when people try to, other colleagues try to withhold information, and frankly, for some, it makes them angry. So that definitely those are definitely some signals. My next question is, so I talked a little bit about how workplace bullying, might happen, but from your perspective, what are, again, some of the triggers that cause one to bully their colleagues? So you might withhold information and those sorts of things, but, what behaviorally, what is it, or, psychologically, what is it that makes people behave in this fashion?
Well, that's why we have all of our HR professionals on the line today, because we get to intervene in those situations that are going to come up. What makes a bully is a large question and one that deserves a lot of study. But for our purposes here, what we want to do is look at, we're going to get it after it's already begun, where we start to see those symptoms that I've talked about earlier. And then we're going to have to figure out how do we intervene in order to address those things. Some of the signals that you may see, you may notice that employees start missing work. They start taking sick. And that's because they're having symptoms on the other side at home. And a lot of things happen at home where they're not sleeping or they're getting frustrated with their families. And it often manifests itself at work. And so those are the things that you start to see performance slip on a particular employee, and it could be because they're being bullied. It's similar to where a child is bullied at school.
And so for the person who's actually behaving in the sort of the bully format, that person could absolutely be angry as well, angry at home, not having don't have perhaps good relationships at home, or even in the workplace. Perhaps they feel like they don't have any quote unquote friends at work, and so perhaps it leads to bullying other colleagues whom they may believe is a favorite of the manager or the supervisor. Those types of things, I'm guessing, could lead to bullying in the workplace.
Yeah, it also goes back to a control thing where the bully wants to exert a certain amount of control. The only thing that becomes a psychological issue is because they get a pleasure out of seeing another person's pain. And that's where the other side comes in. Some people call it perverse pleasure. You've heard that term before. And those are the things we have to look out for when somebody's having too much fun at someone else's expense. And it creates a lot of psychological and biological damage.
So speaking of that, I guess I'll say my next question is kind of twofold. So and I'll ask the first part of the question first, and that is, what is the psycho-emotional impact on the individual who's been bullied? What's the psycho-emotional impact on the person who has, is the person who has been bullied by the bully?
Yeah, a lot of times the person who's being bullied will retract. They'll go into a shell. They won't come out. They won't defend themselves. They kind of want the situation to go away, but it's not, because that just adds to the bully's control need. So you will see where the employee who's being bullied will retreat. Now, sometimes they'll retreat and find a particular person to go to share some of the things that are going on, and that will be good, especially if it's HR, EAP, or even a supervisor. However, if the bully is a supervisor, it must be HR.
Right. What about the psycho-emotional impact on the team? So there's an individual who's been bullied, and they're having, some different behaviors themselves because they've been bullied, and they don't, feel good about it, of course. And then, but is there an impact to the team's performance or to the team in general? What's the psycho-emotional impact on the team when one of the team members has been bullied by another team member?
Well, that's a lot of times when team members start to take sides. And some people will identify with the bully. And, he's one of the boys. I can use the Miami Dolphins football team as an example, where the guy who was the bully was thought of as one of the boys, and therefore actually his bullying was excused by the rest of the members of the team because of that. And so the victim or the person who's being bullied gets ostracized by the rest of the group and feels misplaced. And in that particular case, he even felt suicidal, according to reports.
Wow.
So it can be very devastating to the team.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually a great example. And I've known of some cases where the team members are also afraid of the bully and afraid that they may be bullied as well if they don't side with the bully.
Correct. They could be either bullied or thought of as not part of the group, because a lot of times you will find that a popular person or a person perceived to be popular can be a bully, and they get pleasure out of seeing someone else's pain.
Sure. We're going to go to another short commercial break, but when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion on conflict resolution and crisis management, so stay tuned.
Did you know that when you take a BluPrint Leadership Institute course, you can earn credits towards your PHR, SPHR, and GPHR recertification? The BluPrint Leadership Institute is certified by the Human Resource Certification Institute and by the International Accreditation Organization. Earn CEUs in project management, finance, executive development, and in other disciplines that will keep you current as a 21st century business leader. Register today. www.blueprint-llc.com.
Welcome back to BluPrint Radio. I'm Gloria Thornwell, your BluPrint Radio show host, and our discussion topic today is conflict resolution and crisis management. On the line, we have Dr. Jeffrey King. He's a trained psychotherapist and organizational development psychologist. Dr. King, my next question, I'm going to switch just a tad bit, but let's talk about intercultural conflict. So, the workplace is becoming ever more international. It's a global economy. It's an international, business world. So are there factors, and if yes, what are the factors that might influence intercultural conflict?
That's a good question. You're right. Diversity is all over the place within the workplace, and we have to be mindful of other people's stuff. What happens is a lot of times we have held on to long-standing beliefs that are now changing, and that's when the conflicts come. When someone comes into the workforce that we're not used to seeing, and then they start to become the other. And it's up to us to normalize the workplace for all employees as much as we can. But that is something that we have to monitor all the time. If you have a Muslim or a Sikh or a person of a different race or different sexual orientation, all of those things can create problems within the workplace, and they're all can cause intercultural conflict.
Yeah, I was going to bring up next a point about sexual orientation. So there are again, the workplace is changing. It looks different. than 5 years ago, 10 years ago, even 3 years ago. And so even, the fact that, there are, folks in the workplace, well, we're all in the workplace, but there are folks who have, different sexual orientation or sexual preferences, many times that can cause conflict in the workplace. I remember I worked at an organization where we had an engineer who, a male engineer, and he was married to a woman, and then he moved overseas for about 5 years, and then he came back to the States, and he came back to the place where he worked, to the location where he worked before going overseas. But when he came back, he was a man, and then he had the procedure to become a woman. And so we had to really work, with our staff members who remembers him, with a male name, and then they had to transition, and his name changed, of course, to the female name, and all the, he was a woman. And so we had to prepare our team to be able to manage it and to handle that. So that what we tried to do, in other words, is stay ahead of any potential conflict, because we knew it was different and it was new. I mean, this was almost 10 years ago, so it was much more new then than it is now. And so we had to work again with the team to be sure they were prepared, and we were trying to stay ahead of any potential conflict.
Great.
So let's talk a little bit about steps. And again, I'm going to switch again here just a bit, but let's talk about steps that one should take. When I say one, I'm talking either, the employees, the management team, the HR team. When an outside crisis enters the workplace, what steps should one take? I mean, so first of all, if you can describe us, if you have an example of an outside crisis entering the workplace, and then talk to us about what one should do if that happens.
Okay. I'm going to give you a little bit of one that's really, really, that you hear about in the news all the time. A gunman runs into a building, restaurant, school. That is an immediate threat. And your first priority is always the same. Even if it's a girlfriend-boyfriend and the boyfriend comes into the workplace to try to beat up on the girlfriend, then it's the same thing. The first response of the organization is safety. And that's safety of everybody. You get people to a safe place, and you also you isolate the situation right away. Now, policy-wise, it has to be put in place where the organization takes a zero tolerance against any sort of bullying or a situation where workplace violence or any sort of crisis gets way overhand, and those behaviors should be addressed immediately. It's the immediacy that helps the situation to show that you really mean that you're going to take care of this, that because people want to feel safe in their workplace environment. And eliminating competition sounds crazy. We need healthy competition, but we need to also make people feel secure in their jobs. A lot of times when people don't feel secure in their jobs, it can create a situation where bullying starts to thrive or conflict starts to thrive because they don't know if they're going to be here tomorrow. And those are just a few things that can happen that we need to really look for from a workplace situation. You set up a policy, you react immediately, and you also make sure that safety is first.
And so it would seem to me that it makes sense, so in addition to the policy, to ensure, so what everyone needs to know the policy, but also, to have some sort of training. Would you agree?
Without a doubt. Training is the key because the more training, when someone comes in, if you have already practiced it, you know where to go. It's sort of like the old fire drills we used to have when we were kids, or I don't know how the group is, but I'm in my 50s, so I remember the old bomb drills where we used to all put our heads under the table. But we felt as though that was a safe place for us to go. So it's also incumbent upon the HR staff, the employer, to create that safety zone for folks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Your safe zones are really important, in particular when there's a crisis. Employee staff need to know, where do you go? Where do you go for hiding, in particular if it's someone who has a gun in the workplace? Where do you go for hiding? What do you do? The other piece is, a lot of organizations these days have started text mobile media, so they text, so for instance, if it happens on a college campus, they might text all the students and let everyone know, that there's a gunman on campus and, get to a safe place and, lock your doors, that sort of thing, because it's immediate. Texting is immediate. You get it within seconds, hitting the send button. And so it's technological, but, I would consider that, part of the safety zone.
Right. And safe zones are important, and they're really important to have. There's also a place for emotional safe zones. People have to feel comfortable coming to their EAPs or their HR staffs to talk about situations that may be happening at home that can create a situation that becomes a workplace situation. It has nothing to do with the workplace. Everything is fine. However, the outside comes into the building because of other stuff that's going on. So they have to feel safe at some place in there, and we have to make certain offices, certain people, certain situations safe.
Right. Absolutely. So we're going to take another short commercial break, and when we get back, we're going to continue our discussion on conflict resolution and crisis management. We'll be right back.
Did you know that when you take a BluPrint Leadership Institute course, you can earn credits towards your PHR, SPHR, and GPHR recertification? The BluPrint Leadership Institute is certified by the Human Resource Certification Institute and by the International Accreditation Organization. Earn CEUs in project management, finance, executive development, and in other disciplines that will keep you current as a 21st century business leader. Register today. www.blueprint-llc.com.
Welcome back to BluPrint Radio. Our discussion topic today is conflict resolution and crisis management. I'm Gloria Thornwell, your radio show host, and on the line we have Dr. Jeffrey King, a trained psychotherapist and organizational development psychologist. Dr. King, let me ask you, what is an uneven crisis? I've heard that term before, but I want to know if you can give our listeners a definition as to what is an uneven crisis and how is it handled?
Okay, the best way I'm going to talk about uneven crisis. Uneven crisis is one where you have a manager, a supervisor, and an employee. So it's uneven. They are not the same. People are on different levels, and it can create an uneven crisis. So when the two people are having a conflict, you don't want to handle it the same way. For example, you may want to pull the manager aside and handle them in a different way than the employee because of their situations, and one still has to manage the other. So the best way to handle it is for the HR staff to handle this. This is their baby alone. If they can handle it, they can handle the situation privately, confidentially, within their policies. And it's better for them to handle it as a uninterested third party so that they can bring resolution to whatever situation it is.
Right. That makes sense. And in terms of, so let's pretend a crisis has happened in the workplace. The next question is about the trauma of it. So there's a crisis. The crisis could have been, a shooting in the workplace, and that unfortunately seems to be happening more and more. But my question is, how long does the trauma last? So, if it happens that people are traumatized and they're scared for their safety, they're scared to return to work, does that ever go away, the trauma, the feeling of trauma?
The feeling of trauma, actually, no. However, it is incumbent upon the staff to normalize the business or the organization as much as possible, to bring things back to a sense of normal once safety is restored. So you'll see after a big crisis event or that people don't want to go back to work, a lot of times they don't even want to pull into the parking lot because they're reliving those instances or whatever they heard or thought. If it's traumatic, and the difference being, if it's traumatic, a sense of death or loss of life was involved. If it's crisis, it's just an agitated feeling, but it's not traumatic. But if it's a trauma, then what's going to happen is it's going to take a while. Honesty about what the trauma is, working as teams works to normalize it, meaning you let people know that other people are going through it, that we all are going through this, and we'll get through it together. That's simple, but that's how it works.
And this is where perhaps you get the employee assistance programs involved, certainly the HR staff, the management team, and they try to help, as you said, normalize the environment again as a team and as a partnership.
Yeah, and also sometimes you'll get someone from the outside. And the advantage of someone coming in from the outside is they're coming in to do a particular thing to assist all of those agencies in doing their job. Because more than likely, the people who are there, the HR staff, the EAP, if they're on site or whatever, are also involved in the trauma. So they're dealing with sort of a double dose. So trying to help someone else, and they also have their own stuff going on. So you sometimes need an outside agency to come in to do that sort of intervention for you.
Absolutely. So we're running out of time, but I have one additional question for you, Dr. King, and that is I wanted to talk about employee terminations as it relates to workplace violence and hostility. So what's your professional recommendation to management teams, human resource teams, on how to best prepare to terminate an employee or employees who have behaved in a violent nature, who have caused crises in the workplace? How should they best prepare to terminate that employee? Because I'm assuming the person is going to be terminated. How best might they prepare for that?
Okay, now this is one where it's a dance, and the dance is with security or the local police department or whoever. And also, you don't terminate alone. You never terminate in silence. You make sure that you have someone else in the room with you when the termination is done. Safety is number one. For example, if you have an employee who you know that they've been reading a lot of books about guns and ammo, they have a hunting gun rack on the back of their truck, it may be a situation where you want to pay attention to that particular employee. But what you want to do is you want to make the dance. You want to make it seamless. And you don't want to embarrass the person. You don't want to embarrass them. You want to treat them with dignity and respect as they leave. But you also want them to leave the premises as soon as possible. So they're not there and everything doesn't become heightened as they sit there and they just stew about what's happening and they're getting more and more angry. It's also a good idea to be prepared when they go. Everything. From papers and everything else, even if it's checks or whatever, to be prepared because you really want them off of the premises so you can get back to normal as soon as possible.
So, Dr. King, we've had a very, very enlightening discussion on conflict resolution and conflict management, or crisis management, rather. And so really, in summary, and frankly, the bottom line is that organization leaders have to be aware of the triggers and warning signs that could lead to workplace bullying, as well as other forms of conflict. And if it happens, they have to be prepared to intervene using the right approach and the right technique. So we want to thank you, Dr. King, for joining BluPrint Radio and sharing your insights and expertise on this critical topic. Did you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, the last thing I would say is don't be afraid to use outside sources. They are your friend. They stretch you out from where you are. So you have what you have, but sometimes you need a little more. Use the outside people. Let them help you. They're in, they're out, they're gone. So it's okay to use that. And also be open to change. Be open to change because it's coming whether we like it or not. Other than that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight from my perspective. And thank you, Gloria.
Thank you so much. To learn more about conflict resolution and crisis management, register for the BluPrint Leadership course, the course that can be used for recertification credits towards your PHR and SPHR. You can find our courses by clicking on blueprint-llc.com, and by clicking on Leadership Institute and then Leadership Tracks. Thank you for joining BluPrint Radio. We hope you will join us each Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. Until next time.
Join BluPrint Radio each Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern. BluPrint Radio host Gloria Thornwell interviews organization leaders on trends and best practices in business and human capital management, business and human resource leadership, and being a change champion in the new global business economy. www.blogtalkradio.com/BluPrint LLC.